Hello, my name's Christian. I am doing this video on Chapter 6 of Setting the Record Straight by Gerald W. Bracy. Um, Specifically Chapter 6, it does go over the No Child Left Behind Act. Let me just double check that I'm recording. Okay. I just wanted to double check before I started, so anyway, this chapter it covers No Child Left Behind, the act that was implemented by George W. Bush Jr. With this act, essentially what Bracy is going over is some of the worries that he had as this bill was first being implemented. So let's get right into it. I just want to make sure I had it right and everything. So, for the historical context, the book Setting the Record Straight was published in 2004. In 2000, George W. Bush Jr. was elected president. With this, the issue of the No Child Left Behind Act was a big issue that Bracy is heavily against, as he sees it as a gateway into privatization and a huge leap back for public education and education in general. Um, Now, Bracy's big fear throughout this entire thing is that, Bracy notes the fears he has regarding Bush's No Child Left Behind Act, at one point even listing the ways this could go wrong, though concepts such as summer drop off, which I'll get to when the problems arise. So, as for the brief history of the No Child Left Behind Act, essentially, its goal was to have 100% of students be able to be proficient in the year 2014. Now, 100% of students being proficient is a little bit of political doublespeak. However, they did want to have a large amount of people being proficient. Um, However, Bracy notes that roughly 80% in Minnesota and 99% of schools in California, they would actually end up failing. So like their school system would literally be failing to get their students that proficient at what essentially was the government's very, very strict standards. Um, Now there is some kind of iterations that come with this. The ideas presented in the No Child Left Behind Act seem more to be a mutation of common educational ideas, such as the failed idea of vouchers, which Bracy does make note in his history section about how Bush Jr. was actually very pro educational vouchers, and how that this whole No Child Left Behind Act was essentially a revamping of Bush's ideas around vouchers. Um, Now, a school voucher, also called an education voucher, it's sort of a system, and it's a certificate of government funding for students at schools chosen by themselves or their parents. So essentially, what it's meaning is it's the privatization idea, um, but with the vouchers, it's government funding, and it's essentially ran by Congress. Um, okay. Now there is some problems that arise. Excuse me. As for mobility, Bracy notes the common occurrence of children moving. To be more specific, um, specifically, he notes how some students move school districts often during the school year. This makes it hard for an accountability program to be set up for these students, essentially leaving them behind. That's a little bit of clever wordplay on my end. This concept could also fall below the state's threshold for minimal group size for reporting data. Now doomed to privatize. Bracy makes note about how there was a skewed view involving normal public education. No Child Left Behind essentially seek to strip public education of its merits. And Bracy even states that this reliance of vouchers and charter schools would have to create a distrust in the public education system. As for standardized testing, the testing involved in No Child Left Behind would be the NAEP, which determines state proficiency. However, states will determine what constitutes as proficient. However, the fault in this is not that educators are determining what is proficient. It is mainly Congress and other governmental bodies. Now, a side note on the testing, the standardized testing presented in NAEP test is extremely messy in how it's managed. As Bracy notes, that the NAEP often sees failing rates and low rates of proficiencies, whilst global tests like the TIMSS test have the USA ranked higher. And now, while there is some discrepancies on how the United States will rank higher, um, even on tests where if you look at the data, it shows up as lower, the United States actually does really pretty decent. Compared to other countries. So this sort of like weird standing with No Child Left Behind is extremely confusing, and it just left a big mess for any educational programs or educational body. Now, as for my conclusions, Bracy and Bush. So Bracy is openly biased against Bush Jr. in this chapter, and rightfully so. Bracy is looking for education to be controlled by educators rather than politicians. And I do believe this is sort of a theme that kind of runs throughout the whole uh, chapter. And then he also believes it's doomed to fail. Throughout the chapter, Bracy notes the many ways that No Child Left Behind is essentially doomed to fail. Whether it be like the concept with the really confusing testing situation, or whether it be like mobility. There is one concept, it's called the summer drop off, um, which is essentially in the American schooling system. Schools are open from around August to about May, or yeah, May or about June-ish. Anyways, so there's 3 months, and Bracy does note this in the chapter, but students don't retain that knowledge when they're not in school for 3 months. And so with this, there is you know, the testing discrepancy when they take the test and that summer drop off, it really messes with the rates and the percentages. Anyway, in its current day, or essentially what happened to No Child Left Behind, because this book was written in the golden age of No Child Left Behind. And before Barack Obama was even elected, I think Bush Jr. had 4 more years after this book was written. But essentially, in 2010, Barack Obama tried to rewrite No Child Left Behind and make it more accessible and make it more flexible to the needs of educators and students around the United States. Um, and specifically, this reform was uh, acted into West Virginia in 2013, which is really sort of odd because it's so late in the game for that. However, what ended up happening is that it did get a replacement bill. It was a federal replacement bill, and it was called the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is really funny because it's kind of like a little punch to No Child Left Behind. But it was signed into law, and essentially what it did was it provided schools with more flexibility in standards uh, relating to student performance and testing and all that good stuff. But that's my presentation. I'm Christian Shumate. Here